I was 4 months pregnant. I secretly checked, and it turned out to be a girl. I imagined how beautiful she'd be once she was born. But then, I was pushed down the stairs by Hugo's childhood friend, Viviana Blanco. She even falsely accused me of falling because I had tried to push her. Hugo didn't listen to my explanation. Instead, he took her to the hospital without even looking at me. I was in so much pain I couldn't get up from the floor. I called Hugo, crying and begging him to take me to the hospital and save our baby. Coldly, he said, if the child is going to be as cruel as you, I'd prefer you didn't give birth to it. Later, my neighbors took me to the hospital, but it was too late. The baby was gone. I felt desperate in that moment, but then I saw that idiot's Instagram, her and Hugo holding each other tightly. "You're my whole world," it said. Wiping away my tears, I commented calmly, "Congratulations, from now on, you'll be your whole world." Lying in my hospital bed, I suddenly opened my eyes. Weak as I was, I ran like a madwoman to find the doctor. "My baby," I pleaded. The doctor looked sorrowful. "I'm sorry. We did everything we could." "No! This can't be true." I shook my head frantically, tears streaming down my face as I collapsed, hitting the floor with my hand. My baby was only 4 months along, never even saw the world. I hated Hugo's distrust, Viviana's cruelty, and myself for not protecting my baby. I let out a wrenching cry, and doctors, nurses, everyone nearby offered condolences, but I couldn't hear any of it. I went home, feeling like an empty shell. I looked at the baby clothes and toys in the room, lifting each one gently, touching them as fresh tears poured down my face. My baby would never get to use them. I closed the door, drew all the curtains, and started burning those things, one by one. "I'm so sorry. Don't come back for me in your next life. Go to a happy family with parents who will love you," I whispered. I wanted to die in my baby's place. As the smoke filled the room, Hugo burst through the door, coughing and gasping for air. He rushed to open the curtains and window, then snatched the clothes from my hands. "Are you crazy? Burning the baby's clothes and toys over something so stupid? You're irrational." He really thought it was something stupid. I looked at him calmly. "Why are you looking at me like that?" He seemed a bit unnerved by my gaze and scowled. "Look at yourself. You don't seem like a wife at all." So, he still knew I was his wife. I laughed. How ridiculous. When I was lying on the floor, unable to move from pain, why didn't he think of me as his wife then? Now he remembers I'm his wife. How absurd. "If you think I don't look like a wife, go find Viviana. She's the perfect fit for your idea of a wife," I replied. "You're so irrational," he muttered in frustration. "Sophia, can't you be reasonable? Viviana was pushed by you. Was it wrong for me to take her to the hospital? Don't get the wrong idea. Our relationship is pure." "Pure relationship? Then why were they hugging each other?" I let out a bitter, sarcastic laugh. "Only people with dirty minds think others are dirty too. I can't talk to you anymore." He slammed the door as he left, angry. I laughed sarcastically, knowing he was going to Viviana. But I didn't care anymore. It didn't matter where he went. He no longer had anything to do with me. I had met Hugo in college. He confessed his love the moment he saw me. I was scared and ran back to my dorm with my roommate. After that, he'd wait for me in front of the dorm every day, confessing his love each time and asking me to be his girlfriend. He did this for 4 years. My classmates were moved by him, but I still didn't accept because I didn't believe in love at first sight. After graduation, he followed me to every city I went to. 2 years later, I was moved to finally be his girlfriend. A year later, we got married. I thought I'd have a happy life after marriage, having a husband who loved me. And at first, that was true. But then Viviana appeared. That's when I realized Hugo had only chased after me because Viviana and I looked a little alike. The one he'd always loved was Viviana. How ironic. I had become a substitute for Viviana. It's a shame I didn't understand that sooner, or I wouldn't have fallen for it. I touched my stomach, then turned and went into the bedroom to pack my things. The doctor had told me to rest at home for at least a month, but now, all I wanted was to leave this house. The longer I stayed, the more pain I felt. I took my suitcase and left the place I had lived for 5 years, with no regrets. I rented a small place and called my best friend, Laura, asking her to help me take a month off work. I stayed in that rented house and I rested in peace for the afternoon. Hugo called me from home. "Where are you? Why have all your things disappeared?" I laughed. "I'm making space for you and Viviana. Isn't that what you've always wanted? I'm gone now, so you can bring her home and live openly with her." "What are you talking about?" "I'm warning you, come back right now." I hung up and laughed, picturing Hugo fuming on the other end. In the past, I could control myself for the baby's sake. But now that the baby was gone, I had nothing to fear. Hugo called me every day. At first I answered, but eventually, I ignored him and blocked him. I had given in too much before. He always claimed he wanted to hear my voice whenever he called, so no matter how late it was, I'd answer. But he never asked if I was tired. Thinking back, I realized how foolish I'd been. A month later, I felt like I was finally recovering, so I went to church to pray for my daughter. It was the only thing I could do for her as her mother. As I left the church, I overheard a voice. "Hugo, your birthday is coming up. I want to get you a talisman as a gift. You won't mind a cheap gift, will you? I like anything you give me, and besides, a talisman isn't cheap. I'll carry it with me all the time." "Yes, that's great." Hugo and Viviana walked hand in hand, laughing and talking. I looked at them expressionlessly. When Hugo noticed me, his face grew uncomfortable but quickly shifted. He approached me. "What are you doing here?" It was a ridiculous question. If they could come here, why couldn't I? Sophia, what a coincidence. Viviana came closer, smiling, with pride in her eyes as she looked at me. "Don't misunderstand. I just came to get a talisman for Hugo." I let out a sarcastic laugh. "I don't know if he needs a talisman, but you sure do. A mistress who destroys another person's family should definitely wear a talisman." Viviana's expression changed instantly, and Hugo's face darkened. "That's enough, Sophia. I've told you that Viviana and I have a pure relationship. Why are you speaking like this? Your relationship has nothing to do with me." "I don't care, Hugo. I've already asked the lawyer to draft the divorce papers. I want to divorce you." "What did you say?" Hugo looked at me in disbelief. He couldn't believe I wanted to divorce him. "Sophia, why do you want a divorce?" Viviana appeared anxious, but I could see the joy in her eyes. "Is it because of me?" She looked at Hugo with an apologetic expression. "It's all my fault. Sophia misunderstood me. I should go now." Viviana kept acting, showing a hypocritical attitude that made me so nauseous I almost threw up. "I think you really should go now. This has nothing to do with you." Hugo consoled her. It had always been this way. Every time Viviana played the helpless girl, he'd worry about her. How foolish. "Sophia, I've made my decision." Hugo turned and looked at me with a threatening tone. "I'm the child's father. If you divorce me, the baby will be born without a father. Is that what you want? My child." I felt a pang in my heart. He was already gone. "Yes, Miss Blanco, you should think carefully about this," Viviana chimed in, unhappy that Hugo didn't immediately agree to the divorce, though she still tried to appear kind-hearted. "It's so sad the baby won't have a father. I'll even get a talisman for the baby right now. Maybe you two can reconcile." How dare she mention my child? She was the one who killed him. I shouted, "You have no right to mention my child." Hugo immediately shielded Viviana behind him, frowning at me. "You're crazy, Sophia." "I wish I were, then it wouldn't hurt so much to think about my child." Tears started falling uncontrollably down my cheeks. Hugo stood there, stunned. It was the first time he had seen me cry. At that moment, a priest walked out of the church and approached me. "Miss, you forgot to tell me the name of your deceased child." I wiped my tears. "His name isn't. That was the name I gave my baby." "Wait, the child you're talking about is our son." Hugo's face turned pale. I looked at him coldly. "He's not your child. He's mine. He has nothing to do with you." Hugo froze in place, his body trembling slightly. I decided my revenge wouldn't be quick or quiet. I wanted justice, but more than that, I wanted the world to see Hugo and Viviana for who they truly were. They had taken something from me I could never get back, my daughter, and I'd make sure everyone knew the truth. First, I consulted with a lawyer, telling him every detail of how Viviana had pushed me, how Hugo ignored my pleas, which led to the loss of my child. He explained that although some time had passed, we could still open a case for injury and negligence. It wouldn't be easy, but I was determined. As the legal process began, I planned my strategy to expose them publicly. I opened anonymous social media accounts and started sharing my story with precision. I wasn't trying to appear vengeful. My narrative was cold, direct, and full of evidence. I knew people would feel outraged because injustice always sparks intense reactions. I posted pictures of myself in the hospital and recounted how Hugo left me to take Viviana to the hospital while I lay suffering on the floor, leading to the loss of my child due to his negligence. The responses came quickly. My story went viral, with people sharing it, sending messages of support, and above all, condemning Hugo and Viviana as responsible parties. The comments on their posts increased day by day, calling them murderers and monsters. Brands that worked with them began cutting ties. No one wanted to be associated with the scandal. Viviana, who always flaunted her lifestyle on social media, was the first to crumble. She deactivated her accounts, but it was too late. The story was everywhere, and people weren't going to forget. Meanwhile, my lawyer continued gathering evidence. We managed to get doctors to confirm that if I had received immediate care, my daughter might have survived. Witnesses, including neighbors. My friends spoke up in my defense, and the prosecution filed charges against Viviana for serious assault, while Hugo was charged with negligence. The news made it to the media, and soon the entire city knew who they truly were. They tried to deny everything. Viviana claimed my fall was an accident, and accused me of making everything up out of spite, but no one believed her. Desperate, Hugo began to lose control publicly. He was seen yelling at reporters, and his friends and sponsors abandoned him one by one. Viviana, on her end, started showing signs of nervousness and desperation, aware that the world had turned its back on them. Finally, the trial began, and I made sure to be present. Hugo tried to justify himself by saying he didn't understand the gravity of what had happened, but the prosecution presented solid evidence. He had consciously chosen to leave his wife on the ground to rush Viviana to the hospital. Viviana tried to play the victim, crying on the stand, but her tears didn't fool anyone. After weeks of testimonies and evidence, the verdict was clear: guilty. Viviana was sentenced to several years in prison for serious assault, while Hugo received an even harsher sentence for negligence and abandonment. Their perfect world had completely crumbled, and there was no escape this time. When the judge pronounced the sentence, I stood up and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. I didn't need to see their downfall. I already knew that their suffering was only beginning. Though the loss of my daughter would always remain an open wound, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. Annie would never return, but her memory had been honored. I could finally move forward, knowing that justice had been served. Hugo and Viviana were where they needed to be, in prison and out of my life forever. At last I was free. After the trial, the door I needed to close finally shut for good. Hugo and Viviana were in jail, and I was free. The feeling was almost unreal. I still carried the pain of losing my daughter, but for the first time, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't complete relief. It never would be, because Annie would never come back. But it was enough to keep going. At first, the peace felt strange. I spent weeks in silence, adjusting to the idea that I no longer had to look over my shoulder or worry about messages from Hugo. There was no more manipulation, no betrayals, and no sarcastic comments from Viviana. That chapter of my life was closed. I moved to another city, far from places filled with memories of them. I rented a small house with big windows that let in sunlight. I began to build a new routine. Every day, I'd walk through a nearby park, tend to the plants in my small garden, and read books I'd never had time to read before. Little by little, I discovered it was possible to find moments of joy again. Although the scar remained, Laura stayed by my side as always. We'd meet on weekends and talk about everything except the past. She reminded me of how strong I was for facing everything and finding a way to move forward. And even though I didn't feel strong every day, knowing that someone believed in me made all the difference. While I rebuilt my life, Hugo and Viviana wasted away in prison. Occasionally, I'd get updates from mutual friends who told me Hugo was isolated, sunk into depression, with no visits and no hope of getting out soon. Viviana, on the other hand, was trying to survive as best she could, but without the glamour she had once adored. Her arrogance didn't serve her well in prison, and soon, everyone forgot about her. I didn't need more details. Knowing they were far away, paying for what they did, was enough. I didn't need further revenge. True justice lay not only in the bars that confined them but in the fact that they would never have control over me again. With time, I found new passions. I returned to work, and with Laura's encouragement, I enrolled in an art course. Painting became my way of expressing what I felt. Every painting I created transformed my pain into something beautiful. Years later, to my surprise, a local gallery exhibited some of my works. One day, in a moment of introspection, I painted a portrait of Annie, imagining what she would have looked like. It wasn't a sad painting, it was a tribute. I hung the portrait in my living room as a silent reminder that, even though she wasn't physically with me, her memory would always live on in my heart. The years passed, and life continued at a calmer, gentler pace. I made new friends, traveled to places I had always wanted to visit, and above all, learned to appreciate the person I had become. The pain never fully disappeared, but it stopped being a burden. It became a part of my story, one I carried proudly for having overcome it. One morning, while having coffee, I received an unexpected letter from the prison. It was from Hugo. I didn't need to open it to know it contained an attempt at an apology, or a desperate plea for redemption. I held the letter for a moment, reflecting on the past, then threw it in the trash without reading it. I didn't need anything from him. I didn't need forgiveness. His time in my life was over. With a quiet smile, I picked up my coffee cup and stepped onto the balcony, watching the rising sun on the horizon. This was my future, and for the first time in a long time, I felt I was exactly where I was meant to be.